I'm Nedra Knerk, president of Futura RGV, and I want to welcome Mike Blum. He's the partner and managing broker of NAI RGV, and he is a former McAllen City planner and assistant city manager. And Mike is a future-oriented thinker and works to bring the best to our RGV for tomorrow. Now, Mike and Davis Rankin and I all serve on the McAllen 2020 Census Complete Count Committee. And I have to admit, I have badgered Mike to share his thoughts on how this pandemic has affected our efforts to get a complete count for the 2020 census. But first, I want to thank the Futuro RGV sponsors who help bring these discussions to you. And thank you very much, sponsors. Now, our Futuro RGV moderator, Davis Rankin, will discuss with Mike what we might expect now that the U.S. Supreme Court has ended the 2020 census field operations early in opposition to the U.S. District Court restraining order that extended the count due to the pandemic. And so now, Davis, will you and Mike help us understand what we can expect or not expect from the 2020 census in the next 10 years? Davis,
I feel like,
you're on.
Nedra, thank you. I feel like we need one of those diviners that you read about in days of old, where they try to read chicken guts and stuff to figure out the future, but it's not that. The future lies in the statistics and in a little bit of experience with this, which Mike Blum has. He's good with figures, and he's had lots of experience in this. Yes, the head counting has stopped. What happened? And I don't think there's anybody left on the, at least down here on the census payroll. So Mike, what happens next? And we want to talk about the short count. This may not be the time to drill down on political impact, but the dollars and cents, the money for drainage, the money for water, the money for roads, the money for education, that's hanging in the balance. So what do you want to tell us today?
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to talk about. I think it's critically important for everybody to understand the implications of the decision to stop the count. And there's not a whole lot we can do now as individuals because the count stopped.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of things we can do about the future because we all have time to vote for the next election, and things can change with political changes. So let me first introduce the subject matter in a series of slide presentations so that everybody watching this show will have a better understanding of the numbers and where they're coming from, and the confusion and difficulty in understanding it. Even as a member of this Census 2020 committee, I never did understand the subject matter called self-response rate until recently. So let me flip my screen and go to my magic. This is a slide that shows some historical information in the box.
Yeah.
It says looking back before looking forward. And it shows on the right-hand side in red the 2020 census for the McAllen, Mission, Edinburgh, Texas MSA.
That's the old 2010 census, right?
2010. Yeah. And then the Brownsville, Harlingen MSA. And it shows on the left the rank, the national rank of those MSAs in 2010. McAllen, which is Hidalgo County, was 65th. Brownsville, Harlingen was 127th. In 2028, the Census Bureau publishes an estimate, and their estimate is in the green rows. And at the bottom, we've added those numbers up. And when we add the numbers up, the Rio Grande Valley is a combined MSA, 1.3 million people, ranks 43rd. So we jumped way up when you combine the two metropolitan areas into a region, which was part of the argument that was given to justify the creation of the Rio Grande Valley Metropolitan Transportation Planning Organization from 3 into 1, which gives put the valley in a position to compete at the state level with a much bigger number and a bigger stick.
Competing for
or state-
highway construction dollars.
Yes, these
So
are highway construction dollars. And
we're
it's
not
all-
seen any longer as McAllen and Brownsville separate. We're seen as McAllen and Brownsville together, trying to get money for roads for all of us to drive on.
That's absolutely correct.
All right.
Now, in the box below, this is an attempt to try to put in context the importance of the numbers. There's no question that having a bigger county in Hidalgo County, Cameron County, and the Valley has impacts on the political power of the region. But from a state of Texas standpoint, the population of Texas has grown so much, it may in fact have grown enough to generate a need for 6 or 3 additional members of Congress. And of course, power in Washington is where all the decisions are made.
Mhm.
But what's more important than the political power is the economic impact. It's estimated from census folks that $1,600 per person per year is the dollar impact of the population count in the region. And that equates to $320 million a year in revenues to the Rio Grande Valley community, and over $3.2 billion over 10 years. So the number matters. The population number matters. If you have not yet turned in your census report, you can do it today. But today's the last day. And so
if they do it Sunday morning, it's of no consequence.
Now, unfortunately, people are going to see this. They're not going to see it today. They're going to see it
Yeah.
in next week sometime. So it may be a moot point. But it is what it is. So let me go to the next slide.
So what do you think in your experience? Of course, you run in different circles. This sounds weird. You run in different circles than the average person because of the nature of your work. But what moves people to go, oh, maybe you run into somebody who hadn't filled out the census because they just didn't want to do it. And they go, okay, now I understand why I need to do it. What moves people?
Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time to move them because the door is shut.
Yeah.
City of McAllen, the McAllen Independent School District, Hidalgo County, the cities of Harlingen and Brownsville, San Benito, the Cameron County folks, the region did put out an enormous amount of work, spent a lot of money. The Census 2020 committees valley-wide did a tremendous amount of work to educate and inform the population. And we did a decent job, and let me use this graphic here called the 2020 Census Housing Unit Enumeration Progress by State. That's a lot of words for a title.
I told you run in a different circle. I never saw this before.
But if you scroll down to Texas, it says 99% enumerated. I'll explain what that means in a minute. It says enumerated non-response follow-up. And I'll explain what that means. It says 36.8. But self-response was 62.2. This is a Texas number. And self-response means you filled out the form, or you went on and did it electronically. You self-responded to the census. And so from a state of Texas standpoint, 62.2% of Texas responded. In Ohio, it's 70.3%. In New Jersey, it was 68.9. In Montana, it was 59.9. So it varies from place to place.
Yeah.
But right here in this box, I'm showing McAllen, Hidalgo County versus Texas. McAllen was 60.7 self-response. Hidalgo County, 53.7, not so good. Texas, 62.1. So McAllen is close to what the Texas numbers were, but Hidalgo County is low. Yeah, that's the whole county. And of course, you got lots of places in Hidalgo County. You got rural areas that are predominantly Hispanic in nature, low income, and are perhaps a little bit shy about responding to a government form. And so that's what enumerators were for. That's what the humans were for, to go out and physically knock on the door of people who have not responded to get them to respond. The enumerators go out and they knock on the door, and if nobody answers the door, they have to go back. But whatever the answer to this question is, supposedly Texas had a 36.8% non-response follow-up. That's the number.
Okay.
When I heard about this for the first time, I went 36.8% of what?
Yeah.
What's the number that the 36.8% is computed on? And I could never get an answer to that question. So I drilled a little further. Here is Hidalgo and Cameron County. Percentage non-response follow-up completed, non-response follow-up, 96.8. Hidalgo and Cameron County, non-response follow-up is 96.8% complete. Gee, that's terrific. You go over here to this little chart, completed. And that was, oh, well, gee, if we're 96.8%, that's like almost 100%. Except it's not 96.8% of a number. It's 98.6% or 96.8% of something. And we don't know what the something is.
Wouldn't it be their internal, for your eyes only, estimate of what the census people think they're going to find?
Could be. And it could be some imaginary number that's very low. In 2000, right after Richard Cortez took office in Hidalgo County Judge, he got his staff to begin to work on getting a more accurate count of potential population locations. And they used aerial photography and Hidalgo County Appraisal District maps, and they identified 317,000 household locations. About 100,000 or so more than were in the previous estimate. And that number, if you multiply it times the number of people per household, gets you up to a whole nother number of population than what Census Bureau estimates. We don't know whether any of that information has trickled up to the Census Bureau. It was provided to them, but we don't know, and no one within the Census Bureau hierarchy has revealed the magic of their formula. Here's the last graphic, Congressional District Report. This shows Texas self-response rate, enumerated non-response, and enumerated. And here we have Congressman Gonzalez, which is the 15th Congressional District, 50% self-response rate. Congressman Cuellar, 34, District 34, 50.8%. That's Laredo. And a whole big swath of Texas. None of these congressmen are in our jurisdiction, so I didn't identify who they are. But this is just another graphic showing the self-response rate was not so great, but this non-response follow-up number is a real concern to me because we don't really know what it means, and we won't know what it means, unfortunately, until the Census Bureau publishes their first estimate, their first numbers in April of 2021, which by then we're just captive of the politics of the U.S. Department of Commerce and the U.S. Census Bureau. Every year, this is my 5th census time to participate in the census. That's 50 years, right?
Yeah.
I'm dating myself. I was a young man at the time, but I estimated the 1980 census in advance of it being published as a result of my being involved in an event to try to save the hospital acquisition downtown, and went to the Texas Health Facilities Commission to participate in a public hearing. And I was asked, well, what's the population going to be of McAllen, Texas in the 1980 census? I said, well, it should be somewhere around 67,850. And they said, well, how do you know? I said, well, I explained my formula. And so my formula came out. Well, when the census came out, I was 30 people off.
Whoa.
Yeah, I was really good. I'm not sure I've ever duplicated that. My point of that is your people that live in a house, people per household gives you a number. And if you have 100 households at 3.55 people per household, you just do the math, it gives you a number. My concern, and I've expressed this, we had a conference Zoom call a week or so ago with Futuro RGV, and we had 3 members of Congress.
Yeah.
And you participated in that event. And they were, all three of them were like, oh my God. They were just as baffled by the mysteriousness of the math as I was. And I tried unsuccessfully to get somebody at Census Bureau to answer the question, what's the math? How can you have a percentage of enumerated places that are non-response if you don't know how many places you're trying to enumerate?
Well, that was the regional director, and she either couldn't or wouldn't answer, but there was no answer. Is this wouldn't it be reasonable to believe they would not go into it? The census people would not go into account without having some estimate of what they're going to find? Is that a reasonable thing that they would have their own back of the envelope estimate?
Well, they do that every year. But that was the reason that Judge Cortez did what he did and had his staff do a very comprehensive, detailed aerial photographic analysis versus platted subdivided lots, and were able to identify a substantial increase in the number of rooftops that were previously reported. And that, again, that information was telegraphed to the Census Bureau, so that when they did start the process, this was done way in advance of the start of the census exercise, so that they were starting with a different baseline. But to my knowledge, we don't know, and I don't think the judge knows or his staff knows where they are in their estimate based on the information he provided.
Well, wouldn't it would sort of make sense they wouldn't tell people, because then their the way their method or formula for coming up with that head count for that number would then be under challenge, in addition to whatever other problems they have to deal with in counting heads, which would just be normal bureaucratic, just normal sorts of things. People not showing up for work, people not doing their job, or whatever it is. And I wonder, second to that, how much attempted political interference there is in the census. This is something I never thought about till now.
Well, that's been my concern, because you got a politically sensitive operation at the Census Bureau where you have the Secretary of Commerce trying to interfere with the count when he decided they wanted to count people who were not
lawfully here.
Not lawfully here. They didn't want to count because, well, they shouldn't count because they're not lawfully here. Well, the census, the Constitution of the United States defines who's supposed to be counted, and it's not whether you're legal or illegal, whether you were a left-footed or a right-footed. Are you here? And it's a population count, not a legal citizen count or some other terminology. And so that put a political spin on the decision-making process from the get-go, and it makes you suspicious of everything else that follows. That, fortunately, was knocked out, and that was not permitted to be counted in the census. But it didn't help getting people to self-enumerate, particularly folks who are English challenged. And even though they can do it electronically, many of them live in areas where their electronic opportunities are minimal. Internet access is minimal.
Where the Wi-Fi is not very good.
And the Wi-Fi is not very good. Now, recently, City McAllen and McAllen School District made Wi-Fi almost possible in any neighborhood in McAllen. But that's not true in Northeast Hidalgo County or Northwest Hidalgo County, where you've got colonias, or what were colonias, no longer colonias, subdivisions with 8, 10, 20,000 people. But there's no Wi-Fi connection.
You really think there's that? Well, I guess should tell the listeners or the viewers. I didn't realize how many people lived out till one time we had to do some work for KURV radio. We had to measure the signal in different places around the area. And so I'm driving these country roads up Moorfield, Northwest Hidalgo County, and I was astounded. This was many years ago. Astounded to find houses there, not shabby houses. They were regular houses, and that was on a regular road. It wasn't off in the boonies where people could buy and build a home. What is there any way to? There's no way to adjust the figure after the fact, Right. There's a statistical way to do it, but that's been challenged in the past.
Well, my memory, and I'm going from memory, but I believe it was the 2019, 20,
There was a 2010
yeah,
attempt
2010 census. Judge, county judge
at the time.
Ramon Garcia, he challenged the 2010 census. I don't know how successful they were, but my memory of it is they did get some reconsideration of the number, because they were able to demonstrate the fallacy in the conclusion. I don't know, speaking at this moment, whether or not the Valley communities,
Yeah.
cities and counties are going to be able to mount a challenge, after the numbers come out. We just have to wait and see whether it's materially below where everybody thinks it should have been, or whether it's just a little below. It's just a little below. Well, you probably can live with it. But if it's a lot below, it's like I said, it's a $1,600 per person per household per year. It's a big number. And if it's 30,000 people off or 40,000 people off, that's just do the math. It's not hard.
That's a small town. You Mike Blum, you sell real estate, I guess is one way to put it, but you deal with people who are looking for larger acquisitions than a home. And so you want to show how many people there are, how many rooftops, how many potential purchasers of a product, or do you use the census information or are there private companies that take the census information and then adjust it or fix it, or I would say manipulate, but that has a bad connotation, to adjust it so you say, okay, here's the new and improved figures that business people pay attention to?
The answer to your question is yes. We have access to technology. There's a company called Erisa, ERISI, that's in the business of demographic forecasting and analysis, and they do keep track, and they do it all over the United States. We do marketing proposals on the marketing flyer for the sale of a commercial property, whether it's an office building or industrial building or a retail sales or retail property. And one of the pages in our presentation is a demographic report that shows the population and household income within a 135 mile radius or a 5, 7, 10 or something bigger. The numbers that are in that report are 2010 data, but we can go in to another source and pick out from census estimate the 2019 data and put that where the number is supposed to be, so that it becomes a 2019 estimate. And it, in some cases, it's a big change in the numbers. And so that's what gets produced. And I'm sure all of my competitors and colleagues that are in the business do the same. They have access to the numbers. And so it's a really important part of what we do, because people buy, people live places, and how many people within a certain area impact the decision. I had an inquiry yesterday. One of my associates is trying to sell an apartment complex in Edinburgh, and but it's a pretty big deal, and it's a big money deal, and so he's got to reach out of the area to find big ticket buyers who are willing to make an investment in deep South Texas for a multi-million dollar complex. And so he wanted me to put together can you tell me how many people there are within 100 miles?
A lot.
Well, within 100 miles,
really.
from this particular location, you're just south of Laredo.
Wow.
And you're just north of Falfurrias, and you're somewhere out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, and you're halfway to Monterey. And there's a whole lot of open space in that geography. There are pockets of humans, but it's not big. So I did another circle that was a 64-mile radius from the site, and it gets to the Gulf of Mexico, and it gets to it's kind of the southern side of Hidalgo County and Cameron County, and north of a piece of geography. That became my talking map. And then I went to another slide where I show graphically that the Rio Grande Valley is larger than 11 states, population-wise.
Oh.
Now, what else do you want to know? we're larger than 11 states, and here's the 11 states we're larger than. This is not a small little rural community. 1.3 million people within 70 or 80 mile radius. And then I got another graph that shows the population north of the river and population south of the river, 200 miles wide and 500 miles deep. So it's from the valley north to Dallas, 200 miles wide, and from the valley south to Mexico City, 200 miles wide. And the difference in population in those two rectangles is 10 million to 56 million. Okay, so are we living in an important area? Yeah, we're living in what my good friend Bill Card, former mayor of Arlington, used to call the neck of the hourglass. We are the neck of the hourglass, and that's the hourglass of trade corridor flows, retail corridor flows. And the valley is the center point of that neck of the hourglass argument. And it makes for a compelling case. So in case Mr. Apartment Developer guy who wants to buy a project in South Texas, we got the humans. And it's, oh yeah, by the way, it's right next to the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley and the University of Texas Medical School and yada, yada, yada. So that's how I use demographics to argue a case.
Well, I dare say that all the economic development people use the same information to change or shape, put our best foot forward to change the way people see us here in the Valley. So I think we're at the end of our time. I hate to use the phrase, what's the takeaway from this? What do you want people to?
Well, unfortunately, this video is not going to be seen until after it's too late to making a difference on being able to fill in the census today. But voting you can do, and you can vote till November 3rd. So if you haven't already made a decision, make one. But whatever you do, don't stay home. The last election for president of the United States, the largest vote count was 107 million who did not vote.
Wow. 107 million.
107 million did not vote. And so we got to turn that number around. People have got to participate. Whether you agree or disagree with the candidates running, not voting is not in the best interest of this country.
True.
You gotta express your opinion. So we recommend you do that.
All right, Mike Blum, thank you very much. Nedra Knurk, we want to tell people that they can watch this. They are watching it on the Futuro Facebook page, and they can tell their friends, because this is the information we've had today. Takes a short period of time to look at and absorb, and it's not available anywhere else. This kind of thinking is not available anywhere else, and certainly in this takeaway fashion. So thank you to Futuro RGV, and thank you, Mike Blum, and we'll see you the next time.
I'm the man of La Mancha, tilting it windmill. That was a tip
Thank
off.
you, Mike.
That was a
I
tip
appreciate it.
to Nedra. This is a windmill conversation.
Thank you.
So we're done.